The UCLA Speech and Debate Union. The publication of science, the politicization of science is desirable. The politicization of science is desirable. The chair calls the House to order and will recognize the leader of the government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Sorry, who's timing?
On's timing. He'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, half, and you'll say orally, time allowed. Say it time, because I'm not going to be looking back, so I want to hear it. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Slide over just a little bit more.
My name is Patio, and today Darwin and I will be presenting the government. I'd like to start off with a quote. President Obama said, "We can choose to believe that Superstorm Sandy, severe droughts, wildfires are all just a freak coincidence. Or, we can choose to believe in the overwhelming judgment of science and act before it's too late." I believe this is true, and an optimistic realization, which will allow us to secure the future by embracing science. And we can achieve this through our resolution, the politicization of science by government, which we claim to be desirable. This proposition is to be presented as a value case. Here are some key terms. Politicization is causing something to become political in character. Political is of or relating to the government. Science, a systematically organized body of knowledge on a particular subject. Desirable, wanted or wished for as being useful or necessary course of action. Criteria, benefits or higher quality of life. The politicization of science by government allows for the advancement of scientific knowledge and technological innovation, which in turn, on balance, ensures economic growth, improved human health, and increased quality of life. If we can show you that these values through the politicization of science by the government uphold, the government will win the debate. Today, I would like to focus on 3 contentions to prove my case. Contention number 1. The politicization of science by government provides funding for research. According to National Science Foundation, in their 2014 report, federal spending on R&D has continued to grow, and health-related R&D accounts for the majority, over half, of non-defense R&D. According to the IPCC, atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide have increased to unprecedented levels, primarily from fossil fuel usage. This in turn causes some complications. By the way, the IPCC is funded by the government. As Bloomberg suggests in The Skeptical Environmentalist, we need price decrease in renewable energy, in turn to decrease fossil fuel usage. What has the government done? The government has done exactly that through clean energy investments and standards. According to whitehouse.gov, Obama administration in 2015 will be investing $5.2 billion in base funding for clean energy research while making them inexpensive and accessible. And then you have the Global Change Research Act. Through research, access to relevant scientific and technological findings increases, which in turn fortifies the role of science in policy making through the enhanced ability to understand Earth's dynamic processes while providing ways to adapt and predict. Ultimately, technological innovation and scientific breakthrough would not be recognized without governmental funding. Contention number 2. It provides a basis for competing researchers and private companies to build upon. Can anyone guess the one thing that has been engraved in our lives? The one thing that is inseparable from us? I'll put you out of your misery. It's the internet. The internet has its roots in ARPANET, a government project, the objective of which was to develop communication protocols which would allow network computers to communicate transparently across multiple networks. Basically, they created the TCP/IP. All you need to know about that is that it's the backbone of the internet, created by the government through funding. Point being, federal funded research helped lead to ideas and inventions behind Google and smartphones. Businesses profit off the internet every second of the day, and I'm pretty sure you do too. Probably sell things on eBay, right? 2 other major initiatives funded by the government are the BRAIN Initiative and the Human Genome Project. The BRAIN Initiative is designed to revolutionize our understanding of the human brain, understanding its functions and linking them to diseases. The latter is a sequencing of the human genome, which today stands as as the signature scientific achievement of the government, stated Vattel in 2011, which is the largest independent research and development organization. Both of these will contribute to many different areas, including human personalized medicine and addressing major problems we all care about, such as cure to cancer, Alzheimer's, HIV, and AIDS. Today, advancement by the Human Genome Project has created multiple new industries, companies such as Cellular Genomics, which further add to these breakthroughs. No private company is capable or has the incentive of developing such projects as the Internet, NASA, the Human Genome Project, which all require years and years of R&D funding. What happens is private companies don't have interest in questionable commercial opportunities because they don't like the knowledge spillover, because it doesn't really fulfill the firm's market calculus. But the government is visionary and takes complex challenges, pursuing high-risk research to maximize social return. When research is government-funded, the results shared are less biased, while privately sponsored findings are more controlled and selective, since motivated by profit. My last contention. So as established, the politicization of science by government provides funding for research and technological innovations, which in turn promotes economic growth, which is my last point. According to Huffington Post, funding for science and technology by government is important because it creates economic growth through job-creating opportunities and discoveries. And this has been the case since World War II. We are all benefactors of this. We all have cars, refrigerators, smartphones, and don't forget the AC on this warm day. Under Recovery Act, the Clean Energy Investment created or saved 650,000 jobs. According to Vattel, the Human Genome Project helped drive $796 billion in economic impact, and in 2010 alone, 310,000 jobs. In conclusion, the politicization of science by government is guided towards a common good for all. Major scientific breakthroughs all come down to basic science, which is the focus of federal funding. It sets the foundation for further applied science and development. It drives innovations, creates jobs, and leads to technological advancements, which in turn improve human health and the quality of life, building safer and healthier communities, protecting citizens in all aspects of our lives. For all these reasons, you should vote for the affirmative. Thank you, and I now stand for cross-examination.
Thank you very much. Chair will now hear a cross-examination in front of the podium, not to exceed 3 minutes in length.
Hi, I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam.
I'm going to ask you a few yes or no questions.
Okay.
How major is the role, or is private funding in scientific research play a major role in funding of scientific research?
Yes.
How major of a role does private play?
Oh, sorry, private funding. No. Well, it plays a role, but the government sets the base. So when government funds the basic research, what happens is after that, the private companies build on those innovations.
Okay, you mentioned the BRAIN Initiative. Do you know who or what was the main precursor to the BRAIN Initiative?
Yes, actually, the BRAIN Initiative, initially, a private company did research on the BRAIN Initiative, but we have the government currently who is creating a foundation and making it a stronger foundation for future businesses to build upon.
So is it the government or is it private industries that start the scientific research?
Mainly it is the government who starts basic research because we have the internet, we have the Human Genome Project, but the BRAIN Initiative is one of the few that we had private businesses who did do some research, but the government further is setting a stronger foundation for them.
So one of your main examples was actually funded by private sources, or began to be funded by private sources.
They did some research, but
Okay.
now the government is increasing research
Okay.
for the BRAIN Initiative.
You stated that 650,000 jobs were created as funds were put into science sectors into parts of the economy for the Recovery Act of 2009, right?
Right.
Do you know how many jobs were created in total, including those resulting from the money put into other sectors?
No.
Okay. Get to that later. You claim that a $3.8 billion investment in the Human Genome Project helped drive $796 billion in economic impact, right?
Yes.
You cited a company named Vattel for this. Could you tell me a bit about this source?
Yes, it is, as I stated, the largest independent research and development organization.
So it's a private company.
It's an independent organization.
So was this report peer-reviewed? Is it a peer-reviewed paper?
I'm not sure.
What type of computers do they use at the local Department of Motor Vehicles or at UCLA, a public institution?
Not quite sure. sure.
Just like, I guess, Mac, whatever that is over there.
Okay.
You stated that products of government research are in your cell phone. What brand is your cell phone?
iPhone.
Okay.
But we have the battery and the GPS, which goes back to the government.
Okay. Do you know about roughly how much is funded by the how much scientific research is funded by the government as compared to non-governmental organizations?
Time's up.
It's 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Sorry, did you?
Do you know how much scientific research is funded by the government compared to private sources? Rough estimate.
Enlighten me. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll get into that.
Okay.
But, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chair will now hear from the leader of the opposition for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. Can you slide a little bit to that screen, please, so I can get you in the picture?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, just want to make sure you guys know.
Very good.
You lose your timer.
Can we start?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam.
The topic for today's debate is the politicization of science is desirable. We're the opposition. I'm going to prove to you that it is not, in fact, desirable. But before I start, I'd like to point out that at the beginning of the class, the plurality, 50% of you already agreed that the politicization of science is undesirable. That being said, I'd like to define some of the terms in the proposition. Politicize means to bring a political character or flavor to make it political, and politics is the authoritative allocation of values for society, not necessarily pertaining to the government 100% of the time. Science is systemized knowledge in general. This definition from our textbook states that science is the story our society tells us about the cosmos, further defined as the objective account of the material world based upon measurements and quantification so that structure, process, movement, and transformation can be described mathematically in terms of fundamental laws. The criteria is to improve the quality of life by advancing society's accomplishments in science through maintaining objectivity in science. And I'd like to talk about simply my opposition's arguments. First, I'd like to talk about funding research. Paul Allen, Fred Calvi, David Packard, Howard Hughes, Eric Schmidt, Gordon Moore, James Simmons, Anush Ansari, and Bill Gates all have at least two things in common: insane amounts of money and commitment to research. Conservative estimates of their contributions are $15.8 billion. This is from private sources. New York Times article written just this past March 3rd stated that the benefactors' contribution really helps with funding of science, and that in fact the government funding of science is on its way out as Silicon Valley investors become more rich and decide to pour more money back into science. I'd like to bring up the BRAIN project again. The article states that science is becoming increasingly privatized, and this is evidenced by the aforementioned names and an example of Obama's proposed brain mapping project called the Brain Research Through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies, or BRAIN. Obama is throwing $100 million at it currently and is planning to throw $200 million next year, but here's the catch. The project grew out of richly financed private research by Paul Allen and Fred Calvi. Paul Allen alone donating $500 million a decade ago. And this other guy donated a sum of money too that wasn't listed in the article. So that's roughly double what the government intends to spend, was started by private research. And the scientists in their project that's already going on in place at Yale, Columbia, and here at the University of California devised Obama's plan and plan to work with this brain and be the scientists behind this new project. Now I'd like to discuss my opposition's talk of economy boosts. In her brief, she claimed that the recovery package has allocated $300 billion for health infrastructure, technology, renewable energy, education, infrastructure, and job training. I did my research, and that is 36% of the total stimulus package, that $300 billion. And according to the U.S. News and World Report, 1.6 million jobs were created each year from 2009 to 2012. So, the 36% of money that the government poured into science only created 10% of the jobs created by the actual Recovery Act. 90% of the total jobs were done so by investing in sectors besides science. So they put 36% of the money in, but only 10% of the jobs were created. I'd now like to talk about climate change and fossil fuel debate, and two scientists named Soon and Balianos. Since the leading cause of increasing atmospheric greenhouse gas concentration is fossil fuel consumption, obviously climate change is closely intertwined with the politics of energy. I'm not assuming that global warming is happening. I'm merely pointing out that the influence of politicization deters objectivity and works to the detriment of society. Saul and Bolinas, these two scientists I mentioned, were paid by the American Petroleum Institute to produce a paper to explain how climate change is a problem or an urgent concern. This paper was an analysis of the past 1,000 years of climate data, and it was pretty much citing a bunch of other sources. They did no original research of their own. They claimed to have funding from NOAA, NASA, and the US Air Force, and all those groups denied actually funding them. So the paper claimed to have funding from those sources, but actually was just funded by the American Petroleum Institute. I'd like to read some quotes about scientists regarding the actual content of the paper. Michael E. Mann from the Penn State and Virginia University, as a professor in geosciences, earth, and environmental sciences, stated that I believe it is the mainstream view of just about every scientist in my field that I've talked to that there's little doubt in that paper. They got just about everything wrong. Dr. Drew Shindell, a climate scientist at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, said that the paper had no original research and is in complete contrast to the views of nearly every expert in climate science. Even though this paper was clearly wrong, it was used by the Bush administration to its political advantage. This is where the politicization comes in distorting objectivity. This paper was used by the Bush administration to argue in Congress against certain measures like the Climate Stewardship Act and to edit the Environmental Quality Report distributed by the EPA. The U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, pretty much this is the watchdog committee in Congress, stated that the Bush administration has engaged in a systematic effort to manipulate climate change science and mislead policymakers and the public about the dangers of global warming. This politicization of science does not sound desirable to me. Among all the crimes that the Bush administration committed in this scandal were the utilization of the misleading paper to influence policy and actions. They controlled media access to government climate scientists and edited federal scientific reports to inject unwarranted uncertainty to boost the petroleum industry. As we all know, the Bush was very partial to the oil industry. I'd also like to talk about stem cell research. My opposition didn't mention stem cell research, but politicization has actually blocked stem cell research. In 2001, George Bush banned it, and then Obama in 2009 repealed limited funding and strict guidelines, saying that the possibilities were endless. Some of those possibilities include organ regeneration and curing tissue failure. This means the potential to create unlimited supplies of organs for transplant to cure heart disease, kidney disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, and diabetes. In the next year, in 2010, federal judge banned Obama's decree. So now stem cell research isn't legal. So here we have a science with insane potential to cure many people and save many lives being blocked by the politicization of science. I now stand for cross-examination.
Thank you very much. Chair will recognize a cross-examination in front of the podium for a period not to exceed 3 minutes in length.
Okay. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
So, I'd like to ask you 2 questions. Would you say that liberal democracy allows for deliberation?
Yeah.
Okay. So, in your brief, you didn't talk about it to the class, but in your brief you had talked about totalitarian regimes, correct?
Yeah, I didn't have time. My definitions took too long.
Okay.
I wish I could have talked about
So,
that.
would you say a totalitarian regime allows for deliberation?
Not at all.
Okay. And you cited one of the scientists, Lysenko. He was part of the totalitarian regime, correct?
Yeah, he was the one who pretty much put the disputed evidence. I mean, nobody understands this.
Okay,
Talk about
so
it.
let me just move on. So, first I'd like to illustrate the deliberation process that we just discussed. Politics, it is a crucial part of politics, deliberation. In the beginning of your speech, you said 50% of the class agreed with your side on this topic, correct? That politicization is undesirable.
Correct.
Okay, well I checked the statistics, and it said 17% said that politicization was desirable, 36% said it was undesirable, and 47% said they were undecided. So, right now, you politicized the issue and based it on misleading information. However, I myself politicized the issue and made this in benefit of the class in order to lead them to the truth. So, in conclusion, even if situations may be misleading in some circumstances, it doesn't take away from the value that politicization of science can contribute to society, correct?
I mean, yeah, you're right. I may have misread the numbers, but I was not an attempt to manipulate anyone.
Right, but what I'm saying is, due to deliberation, the truth did come out, correct?
The truth about what?
About the statistics. So if science is objective, and you
I
deliberate
saw
and
the
you
poll.
politicize,
I saw the poll article and I saw 50%. It may
it's
have
fine.
been in error.
It's fine that the statistics are wrong, but when it's politicized, the truth comes out.
Yeah, correct. And how I
Okay.
argued and disproved your points that it didn't come out in your examples.
Okay, so I I argue that politicization of science by government is desirable, of course. You said that the SMB were paid by the American Petroleum Institute, correct?
Correct.
And you said API is a biased source.
Correct.
Okay, so if climate change research was funded by the government, would you say that it would be less biased?
It depends what administration founded it, and also it would depend how the government would then use that information.
Okay, because you did say that SMB claimed to have been funded by objective sources, meaning you were referring to NASA, for example, while in reality they were being paid by the API.
Yeah, I think that if they had been funded by objective sources, the Bush administration would not have been in a position to manipulate the information in the first place.
Correct. So if it's funded by government, it is less biased, basically. Which
I mean,
is our
we'll
point
see
that
whichever
politicization of science.
Whichever way the objectivity could happen, it would be distorted either way. So.
Okay, lastly, would you
I
say
think
that the
Alan said that was time.
It was half 30 seconds. Would you say that politicizing an issue, you make it a salient issue?
Salient in what way?
You make, you bring it to the attention of the public and they become engaged.
In some circumstances when there's media surrounding it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. The chair will now hear from the member of the government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Hello everyone, my name is Darwin Valentine and I'm a member
Hi,
of
Darwin.
Hi Valentine. And today this proposition will be debated or presented as a value case. Just to brief and go back to the key terms in this proposition, we look at politicization, causing something to become political in character. We look at science, it's a systematically organized body of knowledge on a particular subject, so it lies outside just the realm of life sciences. Desirable is wanted or wished for as being useful or a necessary course of action. So let's go down to my main argument. The politicization of science by government allows for the advancement of scientific knowledge and policy innovation that ensures sustainable and environmental development and economic progress, access to new technologies for both private use and private benefit, and a more equitable form of life. Observation 3, my contentions. My first contention is the politicization of science by the government allows our values concerning sustainable and environmental development to be present in the policy making. Let us consider an organization that my partner mentioned, the IPCC, which provides useful and desirable information from the politicization of science because it relies on the funding that comes from federal governments across the world. The report mentions several methods to cut energy costs, greenhouse emissions, amongst other harmful ailments. But the key takeaway is that are the solutions to these problems. Take the ideas from the 2014 IPCC and apply them to how they've been able to recommend to government what policy issues to take. Take the benefits from car regulation in California, in Europe, things that have helped every consumer across the United States by having more gas mileage per car. This could not have happened if it wasn't for the attention and the relevancy that came from the IPCC report, as well as other reports in the past. But this science and technology will continue to grow, as my partner mentioned, in the President's budget, with $5.2 billion going toward base funding for clean energy technology. The same technologies that we've seen already being invested in, already laying the foundation so that private companies can take that on and make it better. Contention 2. The politicization of science by the government and NGOs leads to the development of new technologies in health and food safety, access to information, amongst other subjects. Let me give you an example. In 1958, when NASA was created by Dwight D. Eisenhower, it was for a peacetime purpose for space exploration. This was 8 years before the space race. This politicization of science brought an unprecedented amount of external benefits. Let me just give you 2 tangible benefits you can all relate to. Your water purification systems came from the politicization of science that was only discovered through NASA. The grooves on highways, the same grooves that make it less slippery from the oil that comes off from your cars, that was developed from NASA. However, why is this important? Or why is it relevant to the politicization of science? I want to point out the perspective by Dr. Fabrice Jauderin of Rutgers Hartman College, which provides regarding how his research highlights the necessity for the intersection of science, technology, and economic and political progress. He states, progress in economics and politics are closely linked to nanotechnologies and other sciences. What this means is that we no longer can think of science existing in a vacuum separate from politics. nor can we only consider the scientific knowledge as the only relevant aspect in our lives. Or let me quote Prakash Punjabi, who's a surgeon and editor-in-chief for a medical magazine called Perfusion. He states, science can and should be complementary to achieving a common desired purpose, and experts in science should coalesce with politicians, because ultimately it's the political experts that have a direct hand on what comes out from that research and how it's interpreted, and more so, how it leads to more scientific advancement. But what this statement means is that both science and politics must work in tandem to see the benefits that affect our private and public lives. Let me provide you two relevant examples that illustrate this point. Let's look at all the vaccinations that you've all had at the doctor's office. I believe there's 7 of them. Whether it's a vaccine for polio shots, for tetanus shots, for flu shots. All these could not have happened if not for the breakthrough that came from departments such as the Department of Health and Human Services that was politicized from the government in order to address the medical concerns of the citizens of this country. Between 1951 and 1954, according to the same department, 16,000 people were affected by polio. Now, the same virus does not exist in the Western Hemisphere. Another such example is cancer research. Cancer research costs billions and billions of dollars to fund, all of which has come through the government's funding to be able to get some companies off the ground. But what is the key takeaway? These examples are a mere drop in the sand of all the valuable commodities, private goods, and net public benefits that we forget could not have happened without politicizing science. By making it political, you make it relevant. Contention 3. The politicization of science has led to more equitable and an informed society because of the diverse perspective and deliberation that inherently manifests and that my partner was able to talk about. Let me give you an example of this point. Take the hotly contested debate on stem cell research that Sam mentioned. Without the politicization of the science and making it relevant, as I said before, the knowledge of the benefits and the drawbacks will have never become available for the public disclosure and benefit. In an article written by Mark Brown, a professor of government at CSU Sacramento, he points out a key fact that opponents may argue concerning the private interests that may plague the politicization process. He states, when politics involve inclusive deliberation and articulating diverse perspectives and seeking compromise in the public interest, then politicizing science becomes a means of ensuring that it serves public purposes. What this means is that politicization of science is serving the public interest because the process of politics, and more so politicization, involves deliberation and compromise for further action. More importantly, the politicization of science is truly about giving society the empowerment of knowledge. Science, through research, helps uphold the value of the quality of life. This value is reflected within our own government and its court system. Let's look at, for example, Mayer versus Nebraska, where it was established that we have the right to acquire useful knowledge grounded in the liberty of the guaranteed Fourth Amendment. The liberty and the politicization of science allows us to see the value we attribute to being informed and having a government and society that politicizes science, which as described above, benefits society. For all these reasons, I believe that politicization of science is desirable. I now stand open for cross-examination.
Thank you very much. Chair will eliminate a cross-examination in front of the podium, not to exceed 3 minutes in length.
One thing I noticed in both of the opening speakers, could you please read the topic of the bill?
Sure. The politicization of science is desirable.
How come every time you and your partner speak, you say politicization by the government and not about the other politicizations by oil companies, cigarette companies? What do you think those are desirable too?
We didn't necessarily mention that it doesn't affect other spheres within.
But do you think the politicization through oil companies and cigarette companies, that's desirable?
No,
You don't think it's desirable?
I don't think it's desirable. But what I'm arguing is that my terminology of politicization has to involve government or public affairs of the country, not the private interest
Sure,
of the country.
so
Persuade the audience, Darwin.
besides the politicization of government, you think the other politicizations are undesirable?
It depends on where you're looking at from. You can have public and private.
Okay, from
Partnerships.
cigarette companies and from petroleum companies and like religious groups, you think it's undesirable?
It depends on what your definition of politicization is.
You just agreed that it was undesirable just 2 seconds ago.
I agree that you do not want them to.
Okay, so if oil company, I'll be very specific so you can't dodge this. Oil companies, when they politicize like scientists, you think that is desirable?
No, I don't.
So it's undesirable. So basically, name another form of politicization beside the government that you think is desirable.
It depends on what your
Name another.
is.
Name another besides the government that you think is desirable.
Independent companies that seek to show the correlation between socioeconomic status and education.
You can only name them. You can't tell their motives. You can't name it and tell the motive. You just name them. So you think all independent companies are desirable in politicizing the government?
No, I believe some centers like in downtown LA, the LGBTQ center, which I personally worked at,
Right.
was a political type of company that was independent and it was still serving the public interest. Do its research that was funded from the federal government.
But you admit that there's several types of politicizations that is undesirable.
Yes, but I never claimed that all politicization is correct. I said that it only ends with net benefits. And that's where you're wrong in your claim.
So basically what you're saying is that the politicizations that you can isolate and take the benefits from, you're in favor of that, and that's what you're presenting. But you're not in favor of the politicization of science as a whole.
Does it say science as a whole? Or is it your lack of insight into the fact that there should be an idea that science cannot exist in a vacuum?
The topic is the politicization of science. But what you and your partner are doing, you're nitpicking benefits of politicization and presenting it. So you're not actually arguing for the case. What you're actually arguing for is some isolated benefit of the case.
10 seconds.
Don't you think that when you look at anything such as what's the benefit of an iPhone, you're looking at isolated benefits anyway?
No.
So your
You
own
look at
sense of
overall
logic-
benefits.
Time.
You look at overall benefits.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chair will now recognize the member of the opposition for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Thank you. So, Sam gave a lot of good points regarding history and facts, and since this is a value debate, I want to talk about something that is very relevant to us, an experience that is relevant to us, and a politicized issue of global warming. We both saw those 2 videos in class. Did anything confuse you more than those 2 videos? I mean, I'm a student of science. We've all dabbled in science a little bit. Where else in science have you seen scientists take opposite positions and both of them talk with such certainty and say the other person is a hoax? Have you seen that anywhere else in science? Scientists are honest, and that's the greatness of science, is because it is objective and it doesn't have any agendas to it. But when you politicize science, you force scientists to reveal some results. I've seen this in other in places like creationism and the evolution debate too, which was also politicized. It is not my and your job to determine who is saying the right science, and generally society does not have the time or the resources to determine it. I consider myself quite knowledgeable in science, but I could not figure out who was telling the right facts in that debate. And that brings me my first point, that politicization of science, it threatens the objectivity of science. According to, in 1993, a Princeton University physicist, William Happer, was fired from the Department of Energy because he disagreed with the Vice President Al Gore's view on the ozone depletion. Why are non-scientific experts determining what should be emphasized in science or not? Why can't we just leave that to the scientists? And my opponent somehow suggests that because if science is not politicized, science will not receive funding. I just checked today, there was a CNN report that said that they were offering at the University of Iowa, they had $900,000 worth of research to determine if there's any benefits to snail sex. I mean, science will receive funding irrespective if it's politicized or not. And both my opponents seem to somehow suggest that because of politicization, scientific advancement has occurred. For most of human history, science has not been politicized, and science has still progressed. How do you answer the progress that science has acquired without the politicization of science? Politicization of science undermines the credibility of academia. If you don't trust the messenger, you're not going to trust the message. In the article, Politicization in the Public Sphere, it says that they loathe Al Gore. Sometimes I joke that Al Gore could hold a press conference tomorrow to say that science has determined that the earth is round, and people would say, well, no, it's not. A recent statement in the journal Nature argued that there's a growing anti-science streak that could have tangible societal and political impact. When we give voice to bad science through politicizations, it will cause people to doubt the good science. My opponents keep talking about funding, but it's not always about quantity, it's about quality. I would rather have a scientific body that I can trust and I don't have to question where they get money from and things like that, or a scientific body that has funding from all over these places and we don't understand their motives. Another point that I wanted to bring up, that I did bring up in my refutation, is that politicization is not only limited to government. Oil companies participate in politicization, cigarette companies and religious groups also participate in politicization. Ed said during in the beginning lessons of this class was that whenever he hears someone talking against global warming, he thinks for a second that they're probably funded by the oil companies, and that is a justified reservation to have, and that is the future of science if we politicize it. People will start to doubt where this information comes from, and that is not our responsibility to judge people's motives. Science is based on logic, and just because we want to accelerate the process by politicizing it, that doesn't mean that we can create these types of doubts in people's minds. We're academic students, we might have the time to delve into it and figure out what's true or not, but people who are working on an 8 to 5 job, they don't have time to figure out which science to believe in, which science not to believe in. And Another point to bring up is that if science is given in the hands of the government, and what happens if the government has wrong motives that is seen throughout the world? You can't just assume that the politicization of your current government, and because it is noble at the time, will not cause problems later on. If the government is specifically religious, it may ban certain types of science, will impede science. If it's a dictatorship or totalitarian regime, they might control science and not let certain things come out. So science needs to be independent from the government, because if it's connected, it'll create all sorts of problems in the future. Mainly because politicization creates doubts and mistrust and has caused scientists to be disingenuous in their findings. If you see in the global warming debates that we have seen here, it is almost impossible to determine who is telling the truth, because scientists do not talk about their weaknesses. And the last thing I want to say is that most of the benefits that my opponents are talking about have been going on despite the politicization of science, and they will continue to go on even when there's no politicization of science. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair will now hear a cross-examination, not to exceed 3 minutes in length, focused on the audience.
Okay. So you said science needs to be independent, correct?
Yes.
So we can take that same definition and apply it to NASA, that's been able to develop technologies such as water filtration systems and polarized glasses we wear.
Sure.
Can we agree that this has been beneficial for society?
Well, I think you're confusing the issue. That is not the politicization of science. That is using science irrespective of the government's influence.
But you say the politicization of science is for political gain. That's your definition. But throughout your brief, it doesn't seem like your definition is the politicization of science is for political gain. You give a different definition. But let's get back to my cross-examination. So how has this helped national interests, such as polarized glasses or water filtration systems?
Those could happen irrespective of the politicization.
But it's helped national interests, is what you're agreeing.
No.
But
it has nothing to do with politicization.
whether you agree, it's still the politicization of science in the form of the NASA administration.
You're confusing the issue. The politicization of science, that does not mean that anything that's associated to the government and whatever they develop is associated to the politicization.
But the way that I approach, the way in which I look at your definition, it says the politicization of science is for political gain. So if you take that same definition and you look at the NASA example, was Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was in his last term, was he doing it for political gain, or was he doing it for the benefit of society?
You know, honestly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's a bias. It doesn't matter if the bias is positive or negative. It's still a bias.
But the main
it's
emphasis,
still political gain. Even if you say it's benefit of society, that's still political gain.
But the main emphasis is whether or not, like you point out right across, that it's desirable. Whether it's desirable by students like yourselves that you want water filtration systems. let's go on to my
So you
second
think
point.
you-
To build on this
wait,
example, let us
Let me
refer-
answer the question.
Let us
Let me-
refer
let me
to
answer
what
the question.
specifically say
Let me answer the
about
question.
the politicization
Do
of
you-
science. Most scientific research is not politicized. It comes along with funding. That's exactly from your own brief.
No, I never said that. I never said most science.
You can check your brief again. I'm sorry if I misquoted.
Okay.
Let's look at, can you agree that the House of Representatives is a politicized domain?
Yeah.
Can you tell us all, inform us who the political bank is of the United States? Is it not the House of Representatives?
Probably is. I don't know.
And it funds scientific initiatives, 60% of them, as my partner mentioned. One of which is through deliberation of funds for cancer research.
Save it for your speech. Let me answer it.
But hold on, this is the question for you. Can we agree that cancer research has been politicized by government? And if so, it's because of the funding, the exposure, and the support that's been able to do. Therefore, it's beneficial.
Because they fund them, that doesn't mean it's politicized. Snail sex receives funding. It doesn't mean it's politicized. Science receives funding irrespective. Politicization means that it's political in nature. It doesn't mean that because it funds them that makes it political in nature. That's the difference between what I think and you guys are talking. Every time you're talking about funding, you make it assume that, yeah.
Just going back to the definition, politicization of science is political gain.
Thank you so much. It's now time for the constructives to end and the rebuttals to begin. It's time for us to now engage in four-step refutation. Especially that fourth step.
Classmates, first, I would like to thank you all for being here and listening to us today. Before I start refuting their points, first I'd like to address, they mentioned totalitarian regime, but a totalitarian regime does not have a stable political environment because there exists no deliberation in a totalitarian regime. Therefore, a totalitarian regime cannot politicize science, but it's rather dictating science. It's the tyranny of science. So therefore, we cannot bring in that regime. So, first refutation. They say that the politicization of science leads to lapse in objectivity. We disagree because, first of all, the reason we were focusing on the government is because our definitions, the words, when you look at the definitions of those words, it leads us explicitly to the resolution that the politicization of science by government is desirable because political means of or relating to the government. So, politicization of science by government leads us to unbiased scientific findings because the government pursues knowledge in the national interest and it works for the betterment of our society. Therefore, politicization of science leads to less biased and objective findings as stated in my second contention, such as the Human Genome Project, the Brain Initiative. So, politicization is therefore a good thing. Second, they say stem cell research has not realized its full potential due to politicization of science, which leads to limited funding in certain cases. We disagree because, first, politics is all about compromise. It's deliberation. It's actually only a matter of degree. It's a matter of preference regarding level of funding, not the request not to fund. So government funding is unimpeachable because of the politicization of science. The scientific community is lucky to have bipartisan support, as stated in their brief, I quote, "With strong support from both sides, climate science boomed. Funding for science is widespread and growing in support for stem cell and climate change and much more. Politicization of science is the ultimate mechanism to work towards a safe and healthy society. The government is our best choice and most reliable path. If it's not the government who's going to politicize science, then who is? Did the opposition state any case where the public, you and me, were harmed because of the politicization of science? Was our quality of life diminished? No. We disagree that the politicization of science is harmful because look at the cancer research, look at the Human Genome Project, and take NASA, such as, for example, Janine, you have a bottle, right? You have a water bottle. And that is because water bottle, its installation is due to NASA. So, yes, we don't live in a perfect world, but here are some questions. Did you check your email before you walked into class to see if Professor Miller has sent us an article for us to read, maybe? How did you prepare or will be preparing for your debate? Remember, it's the internet, it's the government funded it, the government politicized the issue. Do you take comfort knowing that you have access to the best and further improving medical advancement and technology? If you answered yes to any of these questions, and I'm sure you answered yes to all of them, then I urge you to vote for the government. Because the government is there to serve you. The government is there to protect you. And the government is there because you have given it consent for it to be there. We believe in politics and politicization because over time it evolves, and through deliberation, just like I demonstrated in the cross-examination, it reaches new objective rounds. Ultimately, the benefits outweighs and the drawbacks immensely. As Clinton said, there's nothing wrong with America or any other country that cannot be cured with what is right with America. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patil. Chair will now recognize the leader, the Prime Minister of the Opposition, for a speech not to exceed 4 minutes, including the 4 steps of refutation.
I'd like to remind you all that the opposition's job is merely to cause doubt that the politicization of science is undesirable, and the burden of proof rests on the proposition. Our definition of by a political scientist, not just a dictionary with a very superficial definition, says it's the authoritative allocation of values for society. And that's not just a statement, that's a whole book that he wrote about the political definition. My opposition said the government provides necessary and ample funding for research. We disagree because benefactors like Schmidt, Moore, Simons, Ansari, Gates, Allen, Colby, Packard, Hughes, and Keck, as aforementioned, donate heavily to the sciences. The brain example that the opposition used is just that. One example of private funding leading the way in research, donating more than double what the government has and will put into the research. The opposition also says that the politicization of science provides funding, which in turn spurs the economy. We disagree because the portion of the stimulus that my opposition cited that creates jobs in science areas, 36% of the money, only created 10% of the jobs by the package. So by that definition, it's actually a lapse in job creation and should have been spent if you're aiming for the benefit of society, more jobs in a different, more efficient manner. My opposition also says that politicization of science provides a base for competing researchers and private companies to build upon. We disprove that through the brain example. And politicization has halted stem cell research. My opposition said that it has actually increased research of certain projects, but under the Bush administration, it was halted because of political reasons due to abortion and right-wing theories. So back to my argument, the politicization of science is not desirable by any definition because it leads to misleading information, lapse in objectivity, and a chain reaction to skewing public knowledge, consequently ill-advised policies and hindrance of technology advancements. This trickles down to a detriment on the quality of life, as demonstrated by the Bush administration manipulating the data from Soon and Bolinas. Politics of energy closely intertwined with the politics of climate change for obvious reasons and stakes that these private companies have. And the Bush administration used this clearly erroneous paper to advance their cause and alter the supposedly objective report from the EPA and in the Council on Environmental Quality under Philip Cooney. Stem cell research, I would like to see my opponent's sources that say all stem cell research has been done through public funding, because that's not true and they didn't cite that. In conclusion, government funding has been insignificant in the past and is only becoming increasingly insignificant. Technology developed by the government is being surpassed by private companies like Mac and Google. Government could create more jobs and get more bang for its buck through investing in other sectors, and the politicization of science causes distorts objectivity, therefore is not desirable. Got that countdown going.
Thank you very much. It's now time for a rebuttal from the member of the government for a speech not to exceed 4 minutes in length using the 4 steps of refutation.
Hello everyone, my name is Darwin again, I'm a member of the government.
Hi, Darren.
They mentioned, specifically Sam mentions, that jobs were still created from the American Recovery Act. 10% of jobs are actually going into environmental or into sustainable research. But we disagree because the value behind this debate is finding just that, the value behind jobs. Are jobs not desirable? Are we not useful? Are we not using those same technologies that are created from the investment from the government? Another point is that they also say that private funding, such as from Bill Gates and from other huge companies with CEOs that have billion-dollar net worths, are really what drives innovative research. But we disagree, because when you look at military aircraft, the research that goes into military aircraft, the aircraft carriers, is billions and billions of dollars. To create one costs $1 billion. So if what you're telling me is that Bill Gates is going to invest in this, it's going to take him all his money that he cannot manifest that easily. It's because of the government that you're able to put in those amount of funds and be able to politicize science for the benefit of society. But my third point is that they say that the politicization of science is harmful and utilized for political gain. But we disagree, because we recognize the important values and benefits it provides for society. Like I mentioned before, the innovations from society, or that affect society from NASA, and through the medical components that come from the military. Therefore, the politicization of science upholds an added value for our societal needs, not a political gain, as their definition mentions. My second point is that they also say that the politicization threatens the objectivity of science, citing such examples like climate change. But we disagree, because we believe their understanding of science and funding is misleading. Science is a stringent process, with years of research, necessary coordination between entities, such as that of cancer research, and massive amounts of funding. The amount to fund initiatives that directly benefit society, like cancer research, nanotechnology, amongst others, is, in this value debate, desirable. Therefore, we believe it is important to recognize how politicization has only benefited the likes of cancer research, Human Genome Project, amongst others, are desirable and a necessary knowledge in our society to benefit not only our public industries, but our private industries. As the previous director of physics at the National Science Foundation mentioned, science and politics are bound together in diverse ways. This bonding has a lot to do with federal funding, but it also is inevitable because of the large impact science and technology have on pretty much everything Americans need. By and large, it has been a good marriage, with many positive offsprings for our society. But I want to leave you with one last point. If you continue to benefit from your smartphones, if you continue to benefit from the internet, if you continue to benefit from all the technologies and innovation and helpful technologies to our society, then you can agree that the politicization of science is desirable. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My opponents say the politicization is desirable. I disagree because they're wrong. Okay, I'm very frustrated with this debate, honestly, and I was very distracted during my speeches because I feel that they've been very dishonest throughout the speech, and I think this is the only time I can have you recognize that. First of all, they've only talked about politicization of science through the government and have totally ignored and not even mentioned how they can even cope with the politicization through the other organizations. They haven't even mentioned them because they know that as soon as they mention that the politicization through oil companies and cigarette companies, their whole argument breaks down. If this was an argument about politicization of science through the government, only the government, that's all they know about, okay, then maybe they'd have a better chance. But they haven't even mentioned all the other things. Secondly, which was completely unfair, is they're trying to pretend that the government cannot fund science without politicizing it. The government has always funded science, and they can do that without politicizing it, without telling them what their results are supposed to be. The funding can still continue. I've seen that they misguided the audience to seem that if there's no politicization of science, then the government can't fund. The funding will still come, even if the science is not politicized. Smartphones. Do you honestly think that smartphones would not have been developed without the government? I mean, to allocate all these technology to the government is extremely dishonest and oversimplistic. They argue that it's objective if the government takes possession of this. But I'll give you a quote from the journal Risk Analysis. In 2003, 7% of the people called climate change a scam, or mentioned it as a hoax or a scam. In 2010, 23% of those people, of the population, call it a scam. So climate change has gotten funding, it has gotten a lot more funding, it has gotten a lot more technological advances, but the public is still unaware about it. It's actually more unaware about it because of politicization of science, because it confuses people. By saying that politicization will make it relevant is also misguiding, because at the moment science is not politicized and it can only emphasize on one or two topics. But if science as a whole was politicized, then everything would have emphasis on it, and then it will negate the purpose. So they're actually saying that the only reason that you can emphasize or make things relevant is because science is not politicized. And the last thing I really want to say is that considering this is a value debate, and it didn't really seem like it, but the one wisdom that I live my life about, it really helped me out, is that things in life, they come in packages. Everyone wants to live long, no one wants to be old. But the reality of the matter is that if you were to live long, the price you would have to pay would be personally inconvenienced with old age. And if we want a scientific body that we can trust, that we don't question, that's integrated in all aspects of society, we must avoid the temptation to try and accelerate the process by using science for even benefits in other ways, because by doing so, we might tamper with the objectivity with it, we might risk coming up with a form of science that's untrustable and confuse society. I mean, the last thing I'll say is that quality is better than quantity. I'd rather have a scientific flow of information that I can trust than a scientific flow of information that is funded, but it confuses everybody, like it shows in the climate change case. It's 4 times as more people are regarding it as undecisive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's now time for the judges to individually look at their notes and come to an individual decision. Does anyone need a ballot? Thank you. The results of the exam. What can we?
Do you want me? I'll do that.
Can I have a look at the,
Does anyone need a ballot?
I want to look at the grades. That's very, very political theoretical rebuttal. That really, made the job guys.
Thank you. I was like alone.
Clapping is incorrect during the debate. You need to knock on your table. Still, we're in the context. Freedom of speech is always regulated by the context, context,
Nick,
and
just a
circumstances.
reminder to make sure I'm included in the disclosure.
Yeah. As soon as we
Yeah, legal, always regulated by the context. Professor, where's the exam grades?
There. You have 2 D's in your name,
2 S's,
but not 2 D's.
not 2 D's. That would be way too many letters.
Too easy.
Has your name been misspelled all your life? Okay, do I have all the ballots?
Where's my
One
grade?
second, sorry.
There's a one more here.
Oh, one more.
Right here?
Not the hiding hole. Turn on, we should get something.
I'll borrow your stapler again, please.
We should. Nice. You will get a decent grade in everything by the end of this one. Where are you graduating?
I'm out of here. I'm tired, you see.
What about your friend? Are you graduating as well?
Yeah.
Are they all graduating?
Barely. This last like barely. It's like 1 but it's 5. Right now it's like 5.
I stay for one more quarter. Like, so I have friends. So I have a friend to hang out with. No, I only get you. I want to watch soccer games with you.
Need a decision.
No, Manchester's gonna win everything. FA Cup, League Cup.
Do I have all the ballots?
I regret that. No, but like in front of, Chief Justice Warren, if someone can say the F word in front of Chief Justice Warren, everyone can say the F word. What? He used to be, right? Before his ascension.
Right after.
No, I don't. He's right before Burger, though. Right before Burger. Warren Burger. Governor? I don't know. I'm not familiar with California politics.
Okay, we have a decision on the question of the politicization of science is desirable. It was 9 to 10 in favor of the opposition. We'll start, I think it's this side today. Yes.
We never start from the middle.
Do like a little spiral outward.
Are you starting from the middle or are you going to start over here? Alright, we'll do this again. Okay. So I thought you guys all did a great job. I personally was flip-flopping with every speaker. This is like one of the first times I actually did that. I thought you guys all spoke very clearly. It was very easy to understand you guys. I ultimately sided with the opposition though, because of the doubt created. I thought that was a good point you brought up. Maybe given our current political climate as it is now, I would say the politicization of science was desirable, but currently is not the case to me. The example of stem cell research I thought was a great one because that definitely is undesirable. I thought that was a very powerful point. And I thought it was a great point by the government, though, that politicized issues get funding and action generated behind them. Like, a lot of issues you wouldn't even know about unless they were brought to the public through the political process. So I thought that was a really good point by you guys. But ultimately, I think a lot of great ideas on the whole happened without the whole politicization, so I had to give my adherence to the opposition side. So, good job, everybody.
Thank you, Tom. Next.
Can I say something?
Sure. At least look at the camera.
Hi, I'm Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
I sided with the government. I know Eugene thinks I have it out for him, but I don't. I'll start with Darwin. Darwin gave a really clear speech. I debated with him last time, so I didn't get to necessarily analyze that stuff, but I'm seeing what Ed meant last time when he said it was a little bit slow. I thought it was still a little bit slow for me, but it was very clear, easy to follow, easy to take notes, and I thought very professional. And I love your use of hand gestures. It really helped a lot. So very good, very well researched, and very good at handling a very difficult cross-examination. And Patil, also very knowledgeable, very good at handling the cross-examination, very professional, very strong. I love that you made your speech purposely extemporaneous, and you put stuff in there where I'm going to relate to someone's water bottle and stuff like that, so that was great. Both of you appealed to the audience, I thought, and you brought home, oh, it's going to help increase welfare of everybody, so that was a great appeal to the audience for me. The opposition, I thought Sam, very, very strong as well. You made the strongest case I felt like you could have for yours, and I like that you said, well, you created a doubt for me, and so I think you created the best doubt you could, but they just won me over a little bit. Vivian, I thought your speech was a lot better than your last one. But still saying things like, I disagree because they're wrong. Doesn't help me. As
Yeah.
That does not help me anyway. It's distracting. It's like, well, what? Okay.
Yeah, I know.
And your closing statement was your strongest. You stepped back, you're extemporaneous, you gave an example from your life, it's memorable, and you also made it quality versus quantity. That's something everyone can agree with, and you appeal to the audience. So I think that was your strongest area, but I think even still, interrupting people in their cross-examination, things like that are taking away from it.
Good. I agree with that comment. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Nathan.
Hi, Nathan.
Start off over here. You guys were very well prepared. It was really easy to follow, and I appreciate all the research you had to do. I just had to go over with the opposition because, to piggyback off what they were saying, they created doubt for me. I don't ever want to have to worry about who's funding research. I want to look at the actual research itself.